Steven Sharif's lawyers just went after one of the most important numbers in the entire Ashes of Creation lawsuit, the roughly $84 million that Dawson and TFE Games say is secured against Intrepid Studios. I want to be really clear about what's actually being argued here, because it's not whether Robert Dawson loaned Intrepid money. Nobody's disputing that. The fight is over whether those loans are legally secured by Intrepid's assets. And that distinction is going to decide how much power TFE has going into the second Article 9 foreclosure. If TFE really holds something close to $84 million in valid secured debt, they can credit bid that amount instead of showing up with $84 million in cash. If a big chunk of that debt turns out to be unsecured, that advantage shrinks fast. Judge Linda Lopez has already said the secured amount needs to be nailed down before anyone can figure out the limits of a credit bid. Back in June, the defendants told the court there were 54 promissory notes worth more than $78 million in principal, and that every single one of them referenced a security agreement. Steven's team turned around and produced notes that told a very different story. The judge looked at 5 examples. 2 looked secured, 3 flat out said they were unsecured and didn't reference the security agreement at all. That was enough for her to order both sides to go through every note and figure out how much of this debt is actually secured. Dawson and TFE's response is now document 153, 58 exhibits over 700 pages. And this is where it gets genuinely interesting. Here's the biggest thing in Steven's August filing, and it's not just something his lawyers are alleging. According to his response, Dawson and TFE's own filing admits that the historical notes were originally written as unsecured, and that the versions now being called the secured notes, along with the 2022 security agreement they're pointing to, were actually executed by Intrepid on December 15, 2025. That date matters a lot because some of these loans go back years. The original notes Steven is pointing to didn't just leave the security question vague. They specifically said the debt was unsecured and subordinated. His lawyers even found signed notes from October, November, and December of 2024 that still use the same unsecured language. And that's after Dawson had already filed the UCC 1 against Intrepid back in May of 2024. So the existence of that UCC filing didn't automatically mean every new loan from that point on got documented as secured. Based on what Steven's citing, Intrepid kept signing notes later in 2024 that said the exact opposite. Then you get to December 15th, 2025, when, according to Dawson and TFE's own execution history, Intrepid signed secured versions of these older notes. One example makes the problem obvious. There's a secured version of a note dated November 23rd, 2020 that references a 2022 security agreement, and a UCC filing that didn't happen until 2024. A document actually created in 2020 can't reference things that hadn't happened yet. Dawson and TFE now admit this secured version was executed later, in December 2025. That doesn't automatically make it invalid, but it does confirm it's a later replacement document, not the paperwork that actually existed when the original loan was made. So here's the harder legal question Steven's lawyers are asking. Did Intrepid validly agree to take years of historical unsecured debt and suddenly put basically the entire company behind it? Dawson and TFE say the December signing happened because of an oral agreement between Dawson and Intrepid. Steven's team pushes back on that from 2 directions. First, they say no such agreement was ever knowingly approved. Second, they point to language inside the security agreements themselves, stating that the written documents are the final agreement and that there is no unwritten side deals. On top of that, Steven's filing notes that document 153 apparently doesn't include a declaration from Dawson, another director, or any witness actually testifying that this oral agreement happened. There's also no clean note-by-note trail, no surrendered originals, no marked cancellations, no novation schedule, no native document history connecting each old note to its replacement. There's a separate problem with the dollar amount itself. The May 2024 security agreement Dawson is relying on doesn't list $84 million in obligations. The attached schedule identifies just about $55 million through May 1st, 2024, according to Steven's filing. The agreement can reach later obligations, but only if those obligations get identified in a document the borrower actually executes as being secured by that agreement. And since some of the later notes Steven produced say they're unsecured, that's part of why the broad UCC filing alone doesn't explain how Dawson gets from roughly $45 million in 2024 to more than $84 million in claimed secured debt now. The UCC filing is still a real piece of this. On May 13, 2024, Dawson filed a UCC-1 naming Intrepid as the debtor and himself as the secured party, with a collateral description broad enough to cover basically all of Intrepid's assets, including the IP. Then on January 7, 2026, a UCC-3 amendment moved the secured party from Dawson to TFE Games Holdings. That gives us a public paper trail from Dawson to TFE. What it doesn't give us is proof of which specific debts were actually tied to a valid security interest. Steven's lawyers flag another wrinkle here too. The UCC-1 names Dawson personally, but the debt itself involves obligations tied to Dawson and several different entities, which raises questions about who owned what, which agreement secured which piece, and how those rights got assigned later. Then there's the June 2024 Master Settlement Agreement, which is under seal, so I can't read the actual language myself. According to Steven's lawyers, that agreement converted certain existing notes into equity, canceled those instruments, required security interests to be terminated, and required UCC termination filings. Their argument is that later amendments brought back the original notes without clearly recreating the security interests. And that phrasing matters a lot if Steven's position is that those original notes were unsecured in the first place. For what it's worth, I haven't found a public UCC termination filing between the May 2024 UCC-1 and the January 2026 amendment to TFE. That doesn't settle the MSA argument either way. A missing termination filing doesn't tell us whether the underlying lien was actually terminated, or whether a later amendment brought it back. And then there's the corporate governance side of all of this, which honestly might be the part I find most interesting. Dawson wasn't some outside bank making a normal loan to Intrepid. According to Steven's filing, he was chairman of the board, the lender, the counterparty to the deal, and the person who personally benefits from an all-assets lien. Steven's lawyers say there was no agenda item, no board vote, no written consent, no conflict disclosure, no recusal, and no approval from a disinterested director or shareholder for turning years of historical debt into a claim secured by essentially the entire company. They're specifically invoking California's rules on interested director transactions, arguing the fairness of this whole deal now has to be scrutinized. Dawson and TFE also point to roughly $3 million in additional funding around the same period. And Steven's team is asking how that relatively small amount of new money could justify securing more than $84 million in old debt. None of that's been decided by the court yet. I want to be careful here because it's easy to read all this and assume the case has been decided. It hasn't. Steven hasn't proven the $84 million is fake, and he hasn't proven none of it is secured. Dawson and TFE do have documents backing their position, security agreements, UCC filings, all of it. The real question the court is dealing with now is whether those documents actually support the full amount they're claiming. And the court clearly isn't taking that number at face value anymore. Judge Lopez has ordered a qualified independent person to go through the promissory note, amendments, agreements, and filings and figure out how much secured debt Intrepid actually owes. Judge Lopez has also appointed a person who will oversee any future foreclosure sale and report back to the court on whether it was handled properly. That's a much bigger deal than just having someone double-check paperwork. Whatever number comes out of that review could set the ceiling on TFE's credit bid. If the review backs up something close to the full $84 million, TFE walks into another foreclosure with a massive advantage. If a large chunk of that debt turns out to be unsecured, converted, improperly revived, or otherwise outside a valid security interest, that credit bid number could drop substantially, and that could completely change who's realistically able to compete for ashes of creation. At the end of the day, the biggest question in this case isn't how much money Dawson says he loaned Intrepid. It's how much of that money is actually legally secured against the company's assets. We finally have a court-ordered independent process built to answer exactly that. Whatever number comes out of it could end up being one of the most important numbers in this entire fight over who controls ashes of creation. I appreciate y'all watching. There is still a lot more to this, and I promise we're going to continue with some coverage and some examination of what we currently have. If you enjoyed watching, please consider sharing, subscribing, and giving me a thumbs up or a likes. Leave a comment. I always love to have some conversation with you all as well. I appreciate you, and I'll see you in the next one.